Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're switching up our content a little bit. Well, not really if you've been to streams recently, but we're going to be talking about some books that I read recently. Now, I'm kind of a hardcover person, so I have a lot of my books in person. If you hear me juggling things in my hand, that is what I'm doing. But yeah, I want to talk about some of the books that I read recently, and I'm going to start with a book called The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. It's probably the most old one I read, so we'll start there, right? Anyways, London Seance Society is kind of a spooky ghost story, if you couldn't tell. It's about a girl who is a skeptic about ghosts. She's very scientific, but her sister was getting involved in mediums, and suddenly her sister goes missing. And she was kind of involved in this weird gentleman's club and also a seance society, as it's called. And her sister just wants to figure out what happens. So she starts to tuck away her inner beliefs, her inner skepticism, and she partners up with the medium that her sister was kind of like interning with. And yeah, they team up together to unravel what is really going on. And did her sister like get some real ghost activity going on? And that's what happened. It's a real mystery. I thought this was a really cozy read. Obviously, it's got some ghost stuff in there, but it's really not like scary horror ghosts. It's kind of more just like cozy tea time ghost story. Like a lot of the interactions are families who are coming to see the medium that our main character is working with, and so it's kind of just like really minimal things like, oh, spooky lights and stuff. And obviously, our main character, a skeptic, is like, this is fake as hell. But as the book goes on, she starts to open her mind up a little more. I really enjoyed all of the cozy foods they talked about in this. I actually had to go get meat pies for lunch one day because they were talking about them so much and it sounded so good. So that was London Seance Society, a very chill, spooky book if you're into that. Next on my list, I have The Cartographers by Pang Shepard, and if you know anything about me, you know that I am a lover of maps. So this book was practically made for me. It is about our main girl who also loves maps because her parents loved maps. She was kind of raised into it. Her dad is like this super cool science or professor guy, and he's super well known in the industry. And she wants to follow in his footsteps, and for a while she does. But one day, they get into this big argument about a map that is seemingly irrelevant, and she gets blacklisted from the mapping industry by her father. And meanwhile, she's like holding on to this for years and years, and eventually her father dies suddenly. And she's just like, well, I never got closure. And she starts looking into things more and more, and maybe that insignificant little argument over that insignificant little map wasn't so insignificant after all. And it's about our girl who thinks that she might be a little crazy, but she thinks that she's also onto something and following a mystery about maps. And I actually learned something really cool about maps in this, called phantom societies, or what is it called? Phantom settlements, rather. And it's basically when back in the day they were first making maps, people who were drawing maps would put little like fake roads or fake towns in their maps as like a copyright feature, so that if one of their opponents made a map and it had their little niche town or road in it, they'd know that their competitors stole their map. And I thought that was just so fucking dope, and is actually like a fun fact. So yeah, I learned that in this book. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I didn't think that the two perspectives were necessary, and I definitely think it's not like a high fantasy or anything, but it's got its own little magic and your own little suspension of disbelief. I saw a lot of people complaining about this book not having enough magic, but fantasy really is just about putting your mind somewhere else and letting yourself be a little convinced sometimes. You know, sometimes it's not about being perfectly true, but sometimes it's about having a good time. And I thought that was a very fun book about maps. If that is your alley like me, then that is a book for you. I hope that you will enjoy it. Our next book is kind of a different one. It is a French translated book called A Winter's Promise. It's from a series called The Mirror Visitor. It is a little different of a book that I would typically read because it did have the pretense of romance, but I will say the romance in this book was not really present, and I am grateful for it because I thought this book was really interesting. It has a really cool world where basically something happened and the world as we know it got ruptured into a bunch of little pieces called arcs. And so there's big arcs that are called major ones, and then there's minor arcs, and there's just like hundreds of them as the earth shattered into pieces, and a lot of them have their own specialties. So our main girl comes from an arc that's kind of about being in tune with items. A lot of the houses in the land have their own souls, you know, like when you see a building, you're like, oh, that building has soul. These buildings literally have souls where they like, I don't like that that window is breezy, close it. I don't like that this door's always slamming, please close it gently. Like they have attitude. Or like they don't like strangers coming in, so you have to wear the house people's clothes or like a jacket to like trick the house into thinking you're one of them. It's really interesting. And our main girl is good at reading, not reading books, but reading items and their history. So when she touches them and you know is in tune with them, she can go back to the history of everyone who's owned this item and their kind of feelings about it and things that happened to them that were significant while they had this item in their possession. And it's really kind of cool, but she's like the best at finding the history. And she has an aunt who's good at like repairing paper. So if you like tore a piece of paper, she could fix it perfectly. A lot of people just have really like weird niche item related skills. Yeah, and she finds out pretty quickly into the book that she is going to be in an arranged marriage. And she's being sent off to this arc that's known for people just being kind of like brutal and feral, and they're like big hunters. They like kill giant monsters and stuff. And she is not really interested because you know, she loves her job and she wants to stay where she is, and an arranged marriage is never fun. But she has to go, and she quickly gets caught up in kind of this big conspiracy involving her own marriage and her husband, well, her soon-to-be husband, who's a little more important to society than she thought. So it was a very interesting ride. I hope that in the future books we get to learn more about the lore of the world because the arcs really interest me, especially the like different abilities that people have. I won't spoil too much about her like future husband's abilities and stuff, but his family is definitely a bit crazy. And I thought the world building was immaculate. It definitely has a little bit weird pacing towards the end, and sometimes things flow a bit weird, but that is because it is translated from French. But otherwise, a very interesting book, and I love world building, so I ate that shit up. Next book on my list is Ancient Sorceries, which is actually a collection of short stories by Algernon Blackwood. He's a really old English author, and he writes a lot of kind of eerie, spooky stories. I will say these stories weren't very scary, but they definitely were very trippy. This has 4 stories in it. I actually didn't like the namesake of it, Ancient Sorceries, which is about a man who feels drawn to suddenly just get off the train and spend the night in a town. He says, you know what, I'm fucking tired, and he decides to stay in this town. But a weird French man gives him a warning, something about cats and sleeping, etc. He doesn't really know the full translation of what the man told him, but he says, fuck it, I feel like this town's pretty chill, and he goes and stays there for a little while before things get just a little odd for him. So I thought that one was a little peculiar, and the pacing was really weird, but my favorite in the story was actually the second one, called The Listener. It's about a man who decides to rent a apartment in London, and he just kind of gets really weird fucking vibes from this place. Like he's always being watched, and like there's someone always lurking on the outside of his door, like listening in on him. And he goes to this lecture that gets him really paranoid about ghosts. And I thought this story was great, but the ending of it was just so fucking weird to me that I still can't get over it. Every time I think about it, I'm like, what the fuck? So obviously I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it was just a really peculiar ride. But up to that point, I really, really liked the vibes of it, of just him being super paranoid and, you know, feeling like there's someone intruding in his thoughts, and like only a ghost could do that, right? All that kind of stuff. The other two stories were pretty interesting as well. The Willows is a really popular story by Algernon Blackwood that's in this book. I mostly picked it up because the cover was really pretty to me. I'll show it on screen for you. I thought it looked cool, so I grabbed that one when I was in the bookstore, and I just thought it was an interesting ride. It definitely had an old style to it, but it was like a cozy, maybe autumn read. I read it at the wrong time of the year, but if it was like a nice fall with crunchy leaves, I could totally see the ambiance being perfect for that. Next up, I read Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed, who I've heard a lot about because she's just got some great fantasy, like fairy tale retellings of Slavic fairy tales, and I love me some Slavic literature, so I definitely wanted to read that. It's definitely got a lot of body horror. I gotta warn anybody who picks this book up, it is a very strange and gory book. But it is essentially about three young girls who are all witches of different types, and they live with their father, who is like the last wizard in this city. And their dad is super protective, kind of crazy, definitely crazy, and he has all these strict rules for them and basically handles all their clients for them and just uses them for their money. But our main girl is the youngest daughter, and she's considered the plain, boring one. Not as many clients come to see her, and all sorts of, just little things. She's more of like the housekeeper, she cooks for her dad, she cleans. Her other sisters are prettier, everyone likes them better, etc. She's not like other girls. But yeah, it's kind of about how she is fighting to figure herself out, and things start being weird around her house, and she spends one night breaking rules, and that just changes the course of her life. And I thought it was something. Parts of it I really liked, parts of it I really didn't like. I feel like it had an odd focus on like sex, which was just kind of weird. Mostly because their dad puts a weird emphasis on like purity, but it was just kind of a weird ride to have a lot of things sexualized for no reason. There was just a lot of heavy topics in here, which I don't mind, but sometimes they just kind of came out of the blue, where you're like reading about something interesting and then all of a sudden there's like a really heavy topic dropped. So I don't know, it's definitely a book you have to handle it with care, but an interesting book nonetheless. The ending was definitely not something I expected, but it was a really fun one. I mean, I thought it was cool, but again, not something I expected. I did predict a couple of things throughout the book, but I never fault a book for that. I am just really good at pulling out crack theories and being strangely correct about them, so that's just me, baby. But otherwise, I enjoyed it, I guess. I wouldn't read it again, but if it's your type of book, then definitely grab it. Lastly, I want to talk about the series that I'm currently working on, which is Continuing Graceling by Kristen Kishore. We read the first two books on stream together. Graceling was okay. Fire was like a strange bad book. I don't know why I hated that book so much, but I did. Bitter Blue, however, one of the best books I have read, I feel like. This book was fucking incredible. I ate that shit up. It is all about, obviously, Bitter Blue, our young queen whose parents died in the first book. Spoiler alert. But yeah, this one is about Bitter Blue and how about like, I think like 10 years later, or no, 8 years later, she is obviously ruling her kingdom and all of the problems that she has to deal with a kingdom that has just woken up from her father brainwashing them all. So that was really good. It had a lot about ciphers and just puzzle solving and conspiracy, and just, man, I ate that shit up. I don't want to spoil too much for you, but I thought the characters in this were really good. They brought in like some super cool graces, like they were like, oh, those gracelings in the first book were so boring, and they just brought in like the coolest graces ever. I'm like, I ate this up. I actually like ate this up. Like, it's like a 500-page book. I read it in like 3 days. It was super good. Can't talk enough about Bitter Blue, which is continuing into Winter Keep, which is what I'm currently reading. This book was like meant to be for me, I think, because I went to a bookstore the other day and I'm just browsing the used book category. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll find a book I'm looking for. I find one Kristen Kishore book and it's Winter Keep. And I was like, No fucking way. I was gonna order it offline, or online, but the copy I wanted was unavailable. This felt like it was meant to be, so I grabbed that shit and I instantly started reading it, and I don't regret it. If you don't want spoilers, feel free to not continue. I'm not going to spoil too much. I just want to talk a little bit, but obviously, if you haven't read Bitter Blue, Winter Keep will be a little bit spoilery. So here's your warning. I'm going to yap in 3, 2, 1. Okay, in Winter Keep, after all of the drama of Bitter Blue, they have actually expanded the map of the world. At the end of Bitter Blue, they find out that the Delians exist, and they actually meet Fire from book 2, even though she's a super old lady now. She's really chill and honestly super fun to read about. I got so excited hearing about Briggan and Nash. In Winter Keep, they have traveled across the seas with the help of the Dells and the Piccians, who are all like friends with Bitter Blue because she's just a bad bitch, you know? But they have decided that in this one, it's time to start establishing some connections with the other lands, especially one called Winter Keep, in this new continent called Torlan. And there's like 5 new cities there. I'm opening the map right now. I'm impressed that I remembered the name. But yeah, there's 5 like new cities in this fucking place, and it's just craziness. They have these super advanced fuel technologies like trains and airships, and there's basically a lot of political drama going on in that book, and I'm into it. Normally I'm not a political drama person, but like I'm into it. War is going down, things are happening, someone is supposedly dead. I won't say who, but everyone thinks that they're dead and they're not, and it's very dramatic. It's crazy. I'm having a great time. They have telepathic foxes. Oh my god, I forgot the coolest thing in Winter Keep. Like, not everybody, I shouldn't say that, but people can bond with a fox, and then they can read each other's minds, and like the foxes can like choose who they want to bond with, and all this cool stuff. Oh, I was so hyped when I heard about the telepathic foxes, man. They're really cool. They're very cool. Highly recommend. If you liked Graceling and Fire, definitely continue because it gets better. It gets just better. I haven't read Sea Sparrow, but I don't care because Bitter Blue and Winter Keep have been worth it so far. And that is all I have to say on the matter. Thank you for being here. I know it's a bit of a shorter video. I'm not used to yapping about books yet. I'll get more comfortable, and I'll definitely be reading more and more as we go. I've been getting better at reading a lot in a month, so hopefully every maybe month or every other month we can do a little catch-up sesh where I just yap for a little bit about all the books that I've been reading, and maybe you'll pick up some books that you want to read. But yes, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and be happy, be healthy, and maybe read a little bit in my honor. See you later, cult members.